Hello everyone, we're going to be talking today about the lymphatic system, immune system, in chapter 14 in Chabner. So we'll start with what is lymph. Lymph actually is a clear watery fluid that surrounds body cells and flows in a system of lymph vessels throughout the body. And you'll see that it's all explained in the YouTube videos. It originates in the blood, yes. It's rich in lymphocytes and monocytes, which are actually type of blood cells. Lymphocytes are the white blood cells. Monocytes are also a type of white blood cells. Flows in lymph capillaries and vessels. Capillaries are the smallest vessels. Flows through lymph nodes, which are what carries the lymph or the lymph fluid, which is the clear watery fluid, and lymphatic organs, liver, spleen, thymus, and nodes. So you have to know what are the lymphatic organs. Absorbs lipids in the intestine, so it has a function, yes. Lymphatic system functions: transports protein and fluid that have leaked back to the bloodstream. Lymphatic vessels absorb lipids from intestines and transport into the bloodstream. Lymphocytes and monocytes protect the body by mounting a cellular attack on foreign cells and organisms. You have to know those functions, okay? Transport proteins, absorb lipid from the intestines, and protect the body by mounting a cellular attack on foreign cells and organisms. So protect, transport, and absorb. Here is the diagram of a lymph flow to the upper chest, blood coming from the arteries. So you see at the capillary level, the lymph is being reabsorbed back into the lymphatic channels, and it's kind of like a debris that's been taken out, or from the cells. It's called interstitial fluid and lymph capillaries. Those are the ones that absorb all that gunk back into the circulation. Here's more of a same. So here's the same depict how the gunk being absorbed from the liver. So you see all those lymph being reabsorbed at the capillary level. It's been taken back into the lymph vessels, to the lymph node, and then back to the veins, which carries blood, unoxygenated blood, to the right side of the heart. From there, it gets to the lungs, back into the left side of the heart. It goes pumped through the aorta into the blood, through the arteries, to the arterioles, and back into the liver, where it's being filtered. So, lymphatic system anatomy: you have to know lymph capillaries, like we saw earlier, lymph vessels, lymph nodes, which are found in the neck, are called cervical lymph nodes, and the armpit are called axillary lymph nodes, and the chest are called mediastinal lymph nodes, and the intestinal is called mesenteric lymph nodes, and the lumbar area are called para-aortic lymph node, and the groin are called inguinal lymph node. The lymph nodes consist of macrophages, or phagocyte foreign substances. B lymphocyte B cells produce antibodies, are mature in the bone marrow, and T lymphocytes, which are T cells, attack bacteria, and foreign cells originate in the thymus gland. So macrophages, phagocytes, foreign substances. B lymphocytes or B cells produce antibodies, mature in the bone marrow, and T lymphocytes or T cells attack bacteria and foreign cells, originate in the thymus gland. So macrophages, I think of it like your vacuum cleaner. They take out all the foreign debris or foreign substances, and they put them in those capillaries, back into the venules, into the veins, and then back to the right side of where it's being filtered by the lymph node, and then taken out. B lymphocytes or B cells produce antibodies. Those are the ones that you get when you get immunized or by vaccines, and they mature in the bone marrow. So at the bone marrow, where you find most of the B cells or the B lymphocytes, which are the white blood cells they call B lymphocytes. The T lymphocytes, those are the ones that are more vicious. They attack bacteria and foreign cells and originate in the thymus gland. So those are your ninja, the ones going to attack and chop those bacteria that are causing the problem. So thank you, T lymphocytes, for a great job throughout the years that I've been alive. Location of lymph nodes. Here we go. We got the cervical. We got cervical, axillary here. We got the area in the spleen. It's pretty much all over the body. But remember the one they're located by um, along strategic points, because those are the points where most of the blood being drained and returned to the heart. Okay, this is the diagram of actually a lymph node, and you can see there's a beta cells. Remember, beta cells are what? Yes, I heard that. The beta cells are the B lymphocytes, and they produce in the bone marrow. The T cells, however, on the other hand, are more aggressive. Those are the ones that kill the bacteria. So those are your ninja, your protect. Those are the ones that are more aggressive and they kill bacteria. The B cells are more laid back, and those are the ones that produce antibodies when you get vaccinated. Very good. So here we go. Those are the macrophages, and those are the lymphocytes here, T cells, B cells, etc. So they all get processed in that lymph node. So guess what? When you have an inflammation of the lymph node, what does that imply? Meaning that those cells are at work trying to destroy some of those bacteria. Moving on to the spleen. The spleen, what's its function is actually to destroy old red blood cells. So think of it like a recycler. It recycles those red blood cells that are no good, and it takes them out and destroys them. Filters microorganisms and other foreign materials out of the blood, activates lymphocytes during blood filtration. Activated B lymphocytes produce antibodies. Activated T lymphocytes, like I mentioned earlier, attack the foreign materials. What else does the spleen do? Well, actually, it's pretty much like a refrigerator. It stores the blood, especially erythrocytes, red blood cells, and platelets. So that's their function. Provides thymus gland, which is right here, right around the thyroid gland, is the thymus gland. And that thymus gland, which is anterior right here, which usually involutes, meaning like it disappears, provides immunity in fetal life. So only one early on in life, like babies or children, but then again it just disappears. And in early years of growth, makes cells immunocompetent in early life. So basically, its function is to make your cells immunocompetent in early life. So remember that key point. An early removal from an animal impairs its ability to make antibodies and produce cells to fight antigen. So therefore, that proves its early function in life, which is early years of growth, which is to provide immunity. So remember that thymus gland early on in life, it doesn't exist in adult life. The immune system is made of what? Is made of leukocytes, which are white blood cells, considered neutrophils, monocytes, and macrophages. So you just gotta know those guys. That's a key point. Leukocytes are made up of neutrophils, monocytes, and macrophages. Okay, lymphoid organs are the lymph nodes, spleen, thymus gland, tonsils, and adenoids. Produce lymphocytes and antibodies. Those are important. Immunity, definition, the body's ability to resist foreign organisms and toxins that damage tissues and organs. Can be natural or adaptive. So remember that, natural or adaptive, and we'll see that what that means in a minute. Natural and adaptive immunity. Natural immunity, remember, like Mother Nature, natural. Resistance, present at birth, not dependent on prior exposure to an antigen. What is an antigen? Usually it's a foreign body. It's like when you have dust outside in the nature. That's called an antigen. Somebody sneezes in front of you. That's an antigen. You get exposed to some chemical. That's an antigen. So when that happens, then you get those cells, which are the macrophages and natural killer cells. They rush to the area and they kill whatever is there, and they take it up. It means they gather it, like they put it in a bag. That's called phagocytosis. So they take it, cytosis, they kill it. Those macrophages, natural killer cells, they put those bacteria in a bag or viruses, and they kill them. And thank you for your service throughout the years, macrophages and natural killer cells. That's why I'm still alive. Okay. So when we talk about an adaptive immunity, on the other hand, we divide it into two: either cell-mediated immunity or humoral immunity. So the cell-mediated involves the T cells or T lymphocytes. Remember we discussed the T lymphocytes are in the inner periphery of the lymph node. We got cytotoxic T cells, helper T cells, and suppressor T cells, which are Tregs. The humoral immunity, on the other hand, involves the B cells or the B lymphocytes. And remember that the B cells produce antibodies. Those are the ones when you get vaccinated. That's why we vaccinate people, to create memory cells, to be able to remember. That's why it's called vaccine. So when another antigen or another of the same kind of bacteria or things that we've been vaccinated for presents in our body, it gets eaten away, attacked by the cell-mediated immunity, and destroy those pathogens. So that's why it's important to have humoral immunity. And yes, it's called immunocompetent. So B cells produce antibodies. Pre cells mature into plasma cells. So remember that, which produce immunoglobulins. Those plasma cells produce immunoglobulins. Without the beta cells, we don't have immunoglobulins. So somebody who has, we will see later on, some diseases in early in life, those kids don't have beta cells. They don't have humoral immunity or adaptive immunity. The B lymphocytes are responsible for humoral immunity. Again, recap, originate in bone marrow from stem cells. The beta cells produce antibodies after exposure to specific antigen, viruses or bacteria, like I've discussed. The beta cell mature into plasma cell that produces antibodies called immunoglobulins to block the effect of antigens. The T lymphocytes are responsible for cell-mediated immunity. Does not involve antibodies. That's also part of adaptive immunity. And those cytotoxic T cells, CD8 plus T cells, attach to and directly kill antigens. So they don't need any mediation. They go straight away and kill those antigens and destroy it. They don't need the B cells. They don't need the memory cells. Other T cells secrete cytokines. What are cytokines? They're interferons and interleukins that helps cell respond to antigens. So it's like a magnet or receptors. You know, when you spray like pepper on food and it tastes good, that's what those cytokines do. The helper T cells are CD4 plus T cells, promote antibodies synthesis by beta cells and stimulate other T cells. Those suppressor T cells, regulatory T cell or Tregs, inhibit the beta and T cells and prevent them from attacking the body's own good cells. Dendritic cells are macrophages derived from monocytes. They recognize and digest foreign antigens. They represent antigens on the surface to stimulate B and T cells. They transfer immunity by exposing dendritic cells in culture. They transfuse them and get them to stimulate T and B cells. Immunotherapy examples would be monoclonal antibodies, which are multiple copies of cells or genes that kill tumor cells, or passive immunotherapy. Vaccines, like I discussed earlier, contain antigens or foreign bodies from the patient's tumor cells that stimulate the patient's own T cells to recognize and kill the cancer cells. That's called active immunotherapy. Transfer of immune cells in bone marrow transplantation, T lymphocytes from a donor can replace a patient's immune system with new cells that recognize tumor cells as foreign and kill them. So, those are some immunotherapy examples. Vocabulary: remember, adaptive immunity we discussed, adenoids and antibodies. Adaptive immunity, ability to recognize and remember You have to know those keywords, guys. You have to know those keywords. Ability to recognize and remember specific antigens and mount an attack on them. So humoral, and we saw this earlier, remember? You recall, right? Adenoids, mass of lymphatic tissue in the nasopharynx, antibody produced, protein produced by the beta cells to destroy antigens. What is an antigen? It's a substance that the body recognizes as foreign, evokes an immune response. So anything that's foreign that comes in the body. Axillary nodes are lymph nodes in the armpit. Beta cells or beta lymphocytes are matures into a plasma cell to secrete antibodies. What is cell-mediated immunity? Is usually T cells that respond to antigens and destroy them. Cervical lymph nodes are lymph nodes in the neck region. Complement system are proteins in the blood that help antibodies kill their target. Cytokines are proteins secreted by cytotoxic T cells to aid in antigen destruction. Cytotoxic T cells are CD8 plus T cell, are lymphocytes that directly kill antigens. Dendritic cells are antigen presenting cells, shows T and B cells what to attack. Helper T cells, CD4 and T cell, those are lymphocytes that aid beta cells then stimulate T cells. So it's kind of like, that's why they call them helper. They're actually white blood cells or lymphocytes that aid beta cells and stimulate T cells to actually go and kill those antigens. Humoral immunity are beta cells produce antibodies after exposure to specific antigen. Remember we discussed that earlier in the earlier slide. Type of adaptive immunity. So the other ones is, you know what I'm talking about. We've seen it. Immunity is body's ability to resist foreign organisms and toxins that damage tissues and organs. Immunoglobulins are antibodies secreted by plasma cell in response to the presence of an antigen. Immunotherapy are use of immune cells, antibodies or vaccines to treat or prevent disease. That's why it's called therapy. Inguinal nodes are lymph nodes in the groin region. Interferons are proteins secreted by T cells and other cells to aid and regulate the immune response. Interleukins are proteins that stimulate the growth of beta and T lymphocytes. Interstitial fluid is the fluid in the spaces between the cells, become lymph in the lymph capillaries, like we discussed earlier in that slide where it shows the lymph nodes. Lymph is actually a thin, watery fluid within the lymphatic vessels and collected from tissues throughout the body. Lymph capillaries are tiniest lymphatic vessels. Lymphoid organs are lymph nodes, spleen, and thymus gland. Lymph nodes is a collection of stationary fluid, solid lymphatic tissue along lymph vessels. Lymph vessel carrier or lymph throughout the body. Large phagocytes found in lymph nodes and other tissues of the body are macrophages. Mediastinal nodes are lymph nodes in the area between the lungs and the thoracic cavity. So mesenteric nodes are lymph nodes in the mesentery. Monoclonal antibodies are antibodies produced in the laboratory to attack antigens and to destroy them. Natural immunity is protection that an individual is born with to fight infection. Para-aortic nodes are lymph nodes near the aorta in the lumbar area of the body. So remember, it's in around the lumbar region, around the aorta. That's called para-aortic nodes. Plasma cell is a lymphocyte or white blood cell that secrete antibodies. Remember, are derived from what cells? Yes, you guessed it, from beta lymphocytes. Right lymphatic duct is a vessel in the chest that drains lymph from the upper right part of the body, empties into the large neck veins. Spleen, organ in the left upper quadrant of the abdomen that destroys worn out red blood cells, activates lymphocytes, and stores blood. We've seen that earlier in the earlier slide. Suppressor T cells or TREG, lymphocytes that inhibit the activity of beta and T T cells. So they won't mount a response. T cell is a lymphocyte that acts directly on antigens to destroy them and produces chemical toxic to antigens. Remember, those are your ninjas. Tolerance, ability of T lymphocytes to recognize and accept the body's own antigens as self or friendly. Thoracic duct is actually, like the name implied, it's in the thoracic area. It's actually a tube that drains lymph from the lower and the left side of the body and empties it into the large veins in the neck. So just a conduit in the thoracic area that brings lymph up. It's called thoracic duct. Thymus gland, we discussed this. It just vanishes when you become an adult, and it's important in immunity in early life. Tonsils are mass of lymphatic tissue in the back of the oral pharynx. That's why they're important, because they get inflamed sometime and you get tonsillitis and you gotta need antibiotic, otherwise you will not heal. Toxin is a poison, a protein produced by certain bacteria, animals, and plants. When you get poked, you get poison, etc. Vaccination is exposure of an individual to an antigen that provokes an immune response that will destroy any cell within the antigen and will protect against infection. A vaccine is a weakened or killed microorganisms, toxins, or any other protein given to induce immunity to infection or disease. Quick quiz: which lymphocyte originates in the bone marrow, transforms into plasma cell to secrete antibodies? You've got to know this one, guys. Okay, make sure you answer it, upload it into under unit comprehension questions. Same as here. The formation of antibodies and lymphocytes after exposure to an antigen is... Alright, now we move on to the combination forms, prefixes, and terminology. Immuno is protection, like immunology. Lympho, like lymphocytes. Lymphadenopathy means like a disease of the lymph node. Spleen is a spleen. Thymus gland. Toxin is a poison. Prefix ana means again or anew. Interstitial fluid is between the cells. Okay, moving on to disorders of the lymphatic and immune systems. When we talk about immunodeficiency, what are we talking about? Of course, is one of the most devastating diseases of the 20th century. AIDS, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. What does it do? Destroys the T helper cells, or CD4 plus cells, and aids in opportunistic infection, which are when there's no more defenses, guys. What's going to happen with all those bacteria that surrounds us? They kind of call them opportunistic because they find an opportunity to come and infect you. That's why they're called opportunistic infections, and we'll see those in a minute. What else could invade the body when you have low immunity? Pretty much anything. Malignancies, Kaposi sarcoma, wasting syndrome. So here's a laundry list of opportunistic infection with the acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. Candidiasis or candida, like thrush. Cryptococcus or cryptosporidiosis. Those are found in the deserts, like fungal-like infection that protrudes, goes into the lung and makes an infection. Cytomegalovirus, CMV infection, usually found in blood transfusion, etc. Herpes simplex or STDs, histoplasmosis is another one of the diseases that are found in nature. Mycobacterium avium intracellulare infection. This is more serious infection, and usually is when the blood count or the T cells or the cell count is usually very, very, very low, less than 50, when this opportunistic infection will invade and cause major infection in an AIDS patient. PCP is a very common, it's caused like pneumonia-like symptoms, and it's called pneumocystic pneumonia. toxoplasmosis usually is very dangerous, especially in uh, AIDS patients. Tuberculosis is another one because of low immunity. What are some of the drugs to treat AIDS? We have the RTIs, which are reverse transcriptase inhibitors. Those inhibit the viral enzyme called reverse transcriptase. Protease inhibitors inhibit the viral proteolytic enzyme, and also there might be a combination of RTI and protease inhibitors that are called HART, highly active antiretroviral therapy. Now, moving on to hypersensitivity. What is hypersensitivity or allergy? Allergy is abnormal sensitivity acquired by exposure to antigens. So when you actually are exposed to certain antigens, for example, hay fever, or then you get something called allergic rhinitis and or anaphylaxis. Other allergies such as atopic dermatitis, asthma, and urticaria, which is caused by hives, and you get this wheals and spots all over the body. Asthma, when you get like shortness of breath, you can barely breathe on expiration, and you need something called an inhaler. Malignancies such as lymphoma, malignant tumor of lymph nodes and lymph tissue, such as Hodgkin lymphoma, which is distinguished by its Reed-Sternberg cell, non-Hodgkin lymphoma, or follicular lymphoma, or large cell lymphoma. Multiple myeloma are malignant tumor of the bone marrow cells. Thymoma, the name implies, remember the thymus that we talked about, a malignant tumor of the thymus that usually involutes in children. Associated with an adult disease, it's called myasthenia gravis. They got protruding eyeballs, they got etc., etc. Patients may have other autoimmune disorders if they have a thymoma, such as lupus erythematosus and rheumatoid arthritis, in addition to the thymoma. So that when they get that, they get something in addition to that. Staging of Hodgkin's lymphoma from stage 1 to stage 4. That you have to upload. What is a malignant condition associated with AIDS? We already discussed this. Laboratory test. How do we test somebody who has AIDS? It's called CD4 plus cell count. Usually measures the number of CD4 plus T cells in the bloodstream with patients with AIDS. ELISA test. That's more of an immunoassay. Detects anti-HIV antibodies. Then how do we confirm it? On a Western blot, as a follow-up, we know it's positive or negative. Immunoelectrophoresis separates immunoglobulins such as IgG, IgM, IgE, IgA, and IgD. And how do we find out that the patient is, let's say, in remission? When the viral load test measures the amount of AIDS virus in the bloodstream. If the viral load test is very low, maybe very low or undetectable, the patient will be in remission, and they will continue taking their heart medication, remember the highly active antiretroviral therapy, until forever, because they will never be purely cured. They will be just in a remission stage, because the HIV virus is actually embedded in the bloodstream and dormant. It does not cause any symptoms unless the viral load goes up. So, clinical procedure, they do a CT scan, which is an X-ray imaging, produces cross-sectional and other views of anatomical structures. So it's like, think about it, it's like a bunch of slices. Okay, so X-ray is one slice, CT scan is a bunch of X-rays or a bunch of slices put together, which usually shows abnormalities of lymphoid organs such as lymph nodes, spleen, and thymus gland. So abbreviations: AIDS, CD4 plus cell, CD8 plus cell, cytomegalovirus, cryptococcus, ELISA, GCSF, GM-CSF, and heart. Again, abbreviation, continue. So get familiar with those terms, guys. More of those abbreviations. So, review sheet where you get to write down what we have learned. The axillary, cervical, immuno, inguinal, lymph, and lymphadenopathy. So, make sure you write those down and get familiar with those terms because you need to know them. Okay. So, make sure you answer this question and upload it into, along with the other 3 questions, into coursework as part of the unit comprehension. And that's it, folks. That will be the end of Unit 5.